So welcome everyone. Welcome to this Young ESPID debate session organized by Young ESPID members. I'm Eleni Vergadi from Greece, and together with my colleagues Danilo from Italy and Suba from the UK, we will moderate this session. So we would like to welcome you to this interesting topic of vaccine dilemmas, where we will try to address several questions that we may come across in our practice. For some of them, we don't have an answer, and so we will be very keen to see the evidence that the Young ESPID members will have to present. Before we start, please make sure that you open your app and you go into this session, into the interactive module, where you will be able to reply to the poll questions that they may come through the presentations.
Okay, thank you, Eleni. So hi everyone again, and I'm very happy to begin these sessions. I see many people, as always, at the Young ESPID meetings, and many big names in the vaccines research in Europe. So we are very glad to have you all. And we will start with the debate one with Marta and Alberto from Spain with MenB vaccine. Do we need a booster for teenagers? You know what has happened in the United Kingdom not long ago, so I think we couldn't have a more timely topic. We were very lucky to pick this before everything happened, but this is what Young ESPID does. So, Eleni and Marta and Alberto, whenever you want, the stage is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for the introduction. We are Alberto Munoz and Marta de las Parras, and we're going to talk today about MenB vaccine. Do we need a booster for teenagers? Okay, so we don't have anything to disclose. And we're going to start with a really small video that is going to introduce us to the topic.
Oh. I have a problem. I don't know what to do. Well, I am going to call to my senior doctor.
Oh, he's calling again. Hi, Peter. What do you need?
I have a patient with fever after having been administered the Pneumococcal B vaccination, and his mother thinks that this vaccine should not have been administered to him, and I don't know what to say to her, and he's hungry, he's furious. Help me, please.
Okay. It reminds me of a consultation I had a while ago with a patient. Hi, how are you? How's everything going? Okay, so today we have year's 12-year checkup, right? And what we need to talk about is vaccines.
Oh, no, please. Please, no more vaccination, please. No, for my arm, no, please, impossible, no, please. Okay, doctor, but this vaccination is truly necessary for him?
We need to give him some routine vaccines. And also, I wanted to talk to you about a vaccine that is not included in the routine vaccination schedule, but that is really recommended, and it's the vaccine against meningitis B.
Okay, if it is for my health, it's okay. Let's be brave. Okay, you have convinced me. We will put this vaccination if it is not so expensive.
So you can use the same recommendations with your patient, because I'm really sure that they will understand the importance of vaccination. Okay? Bye.
Okay. I think this will help me. So thank you. Well.
Okay, so to start, we're going to talk a little bit about epidemiology, because understanding how the disease works can help us to establish public health policies. And although in Europe, meningococcal invasive disease, it's a rare disease, it is a serious infection with a case fatality rate of about 8 to 15%. And as we can see in this graph over here, the serogroup B is the most frequent serogroup of all. Here we have the meningococcal invasive disease divided by groups of age, and as we can see in the graph in the left, it affects predominantly to infants less than 1 year of age, followed by 1 to 4 years of age, and then there's another peak in 15 to 24 years old. And in the graph on the left, we can see that serogroup B is the most frequent of all age of group, starting from less 1 year of age to less than 65 years of age. And in 2023, the last year that we have the data, serogroup B represented 57% of all cases with non-serogroup. And why are we talking about adolescents? Well, because 1 in 4 adolescents carry in an asymptomatic way the meningococcus B in their nasopharynx, acting as the main reservoir for community transmission. And other risk factors associated with this group of age are the social behaviors. They go to university, social clubs, they smoke, and etc. So this is why we're focusing on them.
And regarding to the vaccines that we have available against meningococcal disease, there is a main difference between the meningococcal B vaccine and the rest. That is that the protection is less sustained during the time, because the similarity between the meningococcal B composition, the lipopolysaccharide with the human ones, that made necessary to be made of recombinant proteins and not be conjugated. And we have 2 kinds of meningococcal B vaccine. There is for one hand the true MenB that is more used in America, and it is licensed from 10 years old. And we in Europe mostly use Vaccination, that is licensed from 2 months old, and it is made possible that this to be used to the initial immunization in infant and also in the adolescents. So many countries has introduced the meningococcal B vaccine in its calendar, at first for the immunization schedule for infants, and then there are some heterogeneity between the countries, but more countries are introducing recommendation about this vaccination, and even some regions they are including the vaccination in adolescents in his calendar. So we want to ask for the audience, do you think about the meningococcal B vaccine that a booster is needed for adolescents? Yes, only high risk groups, or not at all, it's not necessary. Let's see.
Okay, I think we have a winner. Most people think that we need a vaccine, a booster.
People like meningococcal B vaccine. So let's.
I think it's.
So I have some doubts, okay, about different things. For example, in terms of diseases, this is a very rare disease. You can see the incidence. So why do we need to strengthen so much the immunity for a disease in which we have to vaccinate more than 100,000 of children to avoid even less than 1 case? If you can tell me.
Okay, so for example, this year we have an excellent example. In March 2026, we had an outbreak of meningitis B in the UK, where up to 23 cases happened, and with a median age of 19 years. And another bad thing is that we had 2 deaths. Everything happened, as I said before, in a nightclub and at a university, and they identified a specific strain. And one thing interesting is that none of them received the MenB vaccination in childhood. So why are we talking about this? Because we have a prevention that, a vaccine that can prevent this disease. For example, in this study made in South Australia, we can see that after introducing after vaccinating adolescents, they saw a 73% reduction in the incidence of serogroup B invasive meningococcal disease in adolescents. And what's more, they saw no cases reported among vaccinated adolescents. So we have a vaccine that works.
Oh, yes, it's true. I heard about this outbreak, yes, in the news. And it's good to have a sort of a prevention tool in that. But what about his security, his safety? I have read some paper, for example, that includes a meta-analysis that shows that adverse effects are common. The local ones that are not severe, but create even reticence and scared with from the vaccination rise up to more than 90%. It's in frequency, and it includes also systemic effects up to, for example, 60% of fever, and it includes all ranges of ages. At the least, is long. Can you tell me about that?
Okay, there's no need to panic because most of these side effects, as you've said, they're mild, they're self-limiting, and the systemic effects were less frequent and not severe. So I think the balance goes in favorable for the vaccination.
Okay,
no
okay.
Worries.
Effective and safe.
Yeah.
Sounds good. So, and I have another doubt, okay? It is truly necessary, for example, to revaccinate those children because we have data. For example, this article that this is very recent, it shows us that the initial vaccination in those infants provides protection that are sustained even up to 4 years after the vaccination. It is proven that. So why do we have to put more vaccine apart that the initial one immunization?
Okay, first of all, because we don't know exactly how long does it take for this immunization to run out. So we have another peak in the adolescents, and they are not protected. So we need to vaccinate them with a booster vaccination, and this we know that it induces a very rapid and strong response. Only with one booster dose.
Okay, makes sense. But I have some concern, an important one. This is the herd immunity. Okay, I have read some articles, for example, this one that is about a study made in Australia that shows that the vaccine in those adolescents that are vaccinated doesn't avoid the state of courage in them. Showing no difference 1 year after the vaccination. I think that this is important, but this doesn't avoid having the meningococcal and to transmit. And it is also interesting to know that it was those results, those adolescents were analyzed in the strain that were colonized by them. And what seen that it was a decrease in some strains of the meningococcal that were non-disease causing strain. So there was a concern deployed in this article that exposed a potential recolonization by disease-causing strains at the long term. So will be even a risk to transmit hyperinvasive bacteria to those adolescents or those people that are at risk. No, I am worried about this issue.
Okay, you're right, but that's a hypothesis, so we don't know. But what you said before, it's right. There is no herd immunity with the MenB vaccine. But what we do know is that another good point about this vaccine is the cross protection that it offers against gonorrhea infection. For example, in this study, they talk about a 40% reduction of gonorrhea infections. And why is this important? Because as we can see here in these graphs, the gonococcal infections is increasing every year, and moreover, in this group of age, which we are talking about, in adolescents, the incidence of the disease is really high. So it's important to talk about it. And here we can see a mathematical model. This is a study that proposed how the MenB vaccine could affect the gonococcal infection, and it talks about 10% reduction in gonococcal infection over 10 years, and this would increase with a catch-up vaccination. And if we look up in the long term, the reduction of gonococcal infection would be even greater. So it's something to have in mind.
Yeah, that is an interesting point. I didn't know that. But I have also heard about some new results that are even yet to be published about that, that it is said the contrary, that this was no one association, because for they is administered in this study, but this is being carried out, vaccines, the anti-pneumococcal vaccine to some individuals that are at risk of gonorrhea, and they didn't saw any difference in the incidence of the gonorrhea in those who were vaccinated, and even in the symptoms of those who has gonorrhea. So maybe this fact is not too clear. So, and let's see, speak about another interesting topic, that is the money. Because it is important, it is expensive vaccines for the country, for the people, and we have to take it into account. For example, in these mathematical reviews, that evaluated several strategies of vaccination that includes those who were focused on infants, those who were focused on adolescents, and the combined one. And they did not found any, or there were any strategy that were proven cost-effective, because of we have spoken about before, the low incidence of the disease and the lack of herd immunity, and that what also assume the high cost that the vaccine is expensive.
Okay, you're right. Money is important, but it isn't everything. And we know that this vaccine reduces cases and deaths, and it also prevents severe sequelae in the long term. So the human cost is also really important. And of course, as you've said, the infant vaccination would be the best in the short term, but in the long term, I think a combined strategy, vaccinating infants and also offering a booster vaccination, could have the greatest overall benefit.
Okay, yes, of course, the money is not everything. You have convinced me, really.
Okay, so after all, we're gonna ask the same question. So, do you think a booster is needed for teenagers? Do you think the same, yes, or only in high-risk group of or specific situations, or no, it is not necessary in adolescents? Okay, so I think we have a winner.
So, to finish, we are going to take home message. Invasive meningococcal disease remains a relatively rare disease. So, studies are based on a small absolute number of cases. Is what we have. But adolescents are a key transmission group. So, meningococcal B vaccine provides strong individual protection, but it is also true that without real herd immunity effects in them.
Also, cost effectiveness remains one of the major challenges in implementing these universal adolescents MenB vaccine programs in Europe. And also, another benefit is the partial protection against gonorrhea that needs further evidence, and it's still going. So, thank you very much.
We will take questions all together at the end, and we will proceed now with the second debate from Liz and Lara from UK and Italy, that they will debate on whether we need a 3+1 in pneumococcal vaccination. Is it necessary?
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Lizzie and I'm from the UK.
Good afternoon, and I'm Laura from Italy.
And we're debating today on pneumococcal vaccination. Is 3+1 a necessity? So if you open up your apps, you can give us an idea to start off with in the room as to what we're dealing with the first question. maybe with the first question. No. Okay, we don't know what's in the room. That's fine. We'll move on. It's a surprise. Tell your neighbor.
Streptococcus pneumoniae is a leading cause of illness in children. Following colonization of the nasopharynx, it can cause non-invasive disease, such as otitis media, sinusitis, and pneumonia, and invasive life-threatening disease, including meningitis, bacteremia, and bacteremic pneumonia. The highest burden of IPD is in infants less than 1 year of age. The nasopharynx also serves as the transmission reservoir from where disease can be spread to other individuals. We can distinguish two types of pneumococcal vaccine. In pediatric population, we use the conjugate one that can produce a long-lasting immune response and that can cover from 7 up to 20 different serotypes.
So for a pathogen with such a clear disease burden, it's no surprise that once the conjugate vaccine was developed, it was rolled out globally. Currently, 177 countries have some kind of pneumococcal program, and 8 are implementing it.
Taking a look at the global impact of PCV, its introduction has led to a substantial reduction in IPD rates that dropped by 82%. But we also observe significant decreases in pneumonia, up to 51%, and otitis media, up to 60%. The benefit is not limited to a vaccinated pediatric population, but the herd effect has generated an indirect protection across all age groups.
So we have a vaccine and we know it works, so why are we here? Whilst globally the pneumococcal schedule has been rolled out, there's significant variation in the type of schedules that's used. This map shows you by colour the different schedules used in countries, and you can see a variation from 3+1 in the US and a few specific countries, to 2+1 in many others, to 3+0 in many countries. The ones outlined in black to the ones outlined in black are the ones where Gavi fund the vaccine, or Gavi support the funding of the vaccination schedule, and you can see a real alignment with many of those countries using a 3+0. And then the UK at the top in the other brighter blue, which is currently the only country using a 1+1 schedule. So which schedule is best? We're going to talk you through the pros and cons of the 4 different schedules, and then at the end, it's up to you to make a decision.
Yes, after the discussion, it will up to you to select which schedule is best, and you will have to take into account the different points of view of these figures that are included in the decision. Let's start with the video.
Good morning, doctor.
Good morning. Hi. Hi.
Another injection. I think my son cried way more than I did at his age.
No, honestly, you look more traumatized.
But seriously, doctor, babies already get so many vaccines in the first year, right?
And every visit becomes a full military operation. Bottle, stroller, crying, missed work.
So, if one less dose really gives the same protection, I think parents would be happy to accept fewer injections.
Yes, but only if protection really stays the same. Because when we hear words like meningitis or invasive infection...
But of course, we want the best protection possible.
So, the real question is...
Does one more injection make a
difference?
So let's try to answer to this question many families and pediatricians could face every day. 3+1 schedule consists of 3 primary doses followed by a booster administered between 12 and 15 months of life. This vaccination strategy has always been adopted by the USA. But which are the evidence supporting this program? Here we can see the evolution of pneumococcal conjugate vaccines. Starting with 7-valent PCV, he was evaluated with a novel formulation, with efficacy as primary endpoint. 3+1 schedule demonstrated in a post-primary series around 94% efficacy against vaccine type IPD. With 10-valent PCV, the focus shifted from efficacy to immunogenicity compared with the previous one. And again, 3+1 schedule showed a strong immunological performance, achieving acceptable IgG response for 8 out of 10 serotypes in post-primary series, while demonstrating non-inferiority for the 7 shared serotypes. And again, with 14-valent PCV, it was authorized in a 3+1 schedule that met the predefined immunological criteria. So 3+1 has a strong immunological, gives strong immunological protection. It can produce higher antibodies during the first year and a more consistent protection before booster. Furthermore, this systematic review demonstrated high post-booster antibody concentration in 3+1 schedules for selected serotypes, including 6B, 19F, and 23F. It is not only a question of immunological evidence, but also a real-world experience. As we can see in this matched case control study conducted in USA, there was a decline in the rates of invasive pneumococcal disease caused by PCV7 serotypes after its introduction in a 3+1 schedule.
That's all great, but 4 vaccines for one disease seems like a lot. That feels like it's going to rule a lot of countries out. Do we have any other options?
Yes, due to high costs, high programmatic burden, and preliminary immunological data supporting that one less dose can also achieve adequate population protection, some countries have adopted the 2+1 schedule that consists of 2 primary doses followed by a booster. For example, Israel has implemented this program in 2009. And what can we learn from the experience of this country? As we can see, PCV program in Israel impacted the occurrence of IPD in several age groups of children. This is a population-based prospective nationwide surveillance demonstrating that the overall IPD cases declined in children less than 2 years of age, up to 70% from the pre-PCV period to the late 14-valent period. Furthermore, similar magnitude reductions of IPD were observed between fully vaccinated infants who have only completed the primary series, and infants who have only received 1 or fewer doses. This data suggests that 2+1 implementation of PCV7 and PCV14 led to indirect protection across children who were not vaccinated. Furthermore, PCV have been demonstrated to reduce the carriage of vaccine-type strains in vaccinated children, thus reducing the opportunities for transmission, and as a consequence, the rate of IPD also declined in adults who were not vaccinated at all.
Okay, but when we look at the map, we still have so many countries that are using a 3+0 schedule, so there must be a reason. Zimbabwe is one example of a sub-Saharan African country that uses a 3+0 schedule and is Gavi supported. They give it at 6, 10 and 14 weeks alongside the routine infant immunizations. And it's clear why when you look at this data. This is European data from 2022, which shows the distribution of IPD cases. And we can see that apart from the 65 plus, and this is not a conference about old people, we're looking at the highest incidence being in under 1s down here. This is clearly the most vulnerable population with the highest rate of cases and the highest morbidity and mortality. So giving a 3+0 and giving all 3 doses early clearly protects them and limits this vulnerable window as much as possible. We also know that when we vaccinate earlier, we get better uptake. So this graph is demonstrating at the top blue, the first, third, and then 4th booster dose of DTP globally. We can see there's a substantial difference in the number of uptake we get for each of these. And if we were to rely on a booster dose, the chances are we'd miss a lot of infants. If we're going to pay for 3 doses, we should be paying for them in the times and they're going to get most commonly into arms and make a difference. We also know, as we've seen, when we start to reduce doses and change schedules, it's difficult to know if it's working until we have evidence showing that there's no increased IPD and showing that it's worked. This is a list of all the sites involved in a global pneumococcal disease study, and we can see that there's very few low and middle income countries contributing surveillance data. So there's a few countries here from sub-Saharan Africa, but apart from that, very few countries are able to contribute, and so we don't have the data or the surveillance infrastructure to know whether we're making a difference with a schedule change or whether it's being done safely. In addition, with PCV13 or even other valencies, we're not just talking about one strain, we're talking about 13 different serotypes, all of which need to be protected against. And if we're going to start schedule changing and dropping doses, we need to be sure that all serotypes are remaining protected, not just a few of them.
Okay. It's important to vaccinate children in the first year of life. But are we sure that it's not the booster dose to make the difference? We can learn something also from the Australia real-world experience. This is a retrospective observational study in which the authors demonstrated that breakthrough IPD cases declined by 50% in 2+1 eligible children compared to 3+0 schedule eligible. This is consistent with a better vaccine-induced immune response when we have a booster dose administered during toddler years. That is when the pneumococcal carriage peaks.
Okay, so if we're saying a booster is the most important thing, then maybe 1+1 is the answer. The UK uses a 1+1 schedule that they introduced in 2020, and here is an expert to tell us why it's the best.
As a very important vaccine policymaker, the choice is very clear. Only 2 vaccines as opposed to 4. How can that not be the right choice? The study showed no more infection or disease in the reduced schedule, and of course it saves loads of money. Not many countries have the schedule yet, but where it has been tested in the Gambia, it's had top-hole results. It makes no sense giving kids more vaccines than they need when there are so many new vaccines being developed that we could add instead of taking up space with more of the same. Vaccine decisions are often difficult with consideration of lots of factors like cost, logistics, acceptability and disease burden, but this one seems easy. Less doses for equal protection must be the answer.
So, to back that up, here's the data. It works just as well. So this is data from an observational study in the UK after they changed the schedule at the beginning of 2020. For fairly obvious reasons, they've ignored the year 2020 to 2021 in the analysis, but the years after are in the green brackets in all the different age groups. And there's no significant increase in PCV13 vaccine type serotypes of causing IPD. Which is reassuring that actually a 1+1 schedule, not only in the infants that got the 1+1, but also in the older children, made no change. There was also no increase in breakthrough infections or in vaccine failure cases, with very low absolute numbers, and no significant differences between the years around the schedule change either. It's also been tested in other settings with high disease burden, such as the Gambia. So the results were published in the WHO position paper that was published in September 2025 and showed there was no increase in clinical pneumonia vaccine type carriage or in radiologically diagnosed pneumonia in children under 5, which again is reassuring in a setting that has less of an established herd immunity and a higher disease burden.
Okay, but what about higher valency vaccines? We cannot forget that 20-valent PCV in a pivotal study demonstrated non-inferiority compared to 14-valent PCV, but it produced overall lower antibody titers compared to it. So, how can we say that fewer doses schedules such as 1+1 will achieve an adequate protection?
So, in summary, to go through the 4 schedules, a 3+0 prioritizes early protection of the most vulnerable children and also optimizes uptake by using the appointments we know are best attended. But we do have concerns that we're reliant on these early life responses, which we know are weaker than in later life, and there could be waning protection, leaving older children more vulnerable.
3+1 has a strong immunological performance, achieving higher antibodies during the first year and a more consistent protection before and after booster. On the other side, it implies higher costs and higher programmatic burden. 3+1 can guarantee higher antibody titers in the second year of life and is more cost-effective compared to the 3+1. However, as we see, he relies on high vaccine coverage, and that could be a potential window of vulnerability before the booster.
And 1+1 is the most effective with only 2 vaccines and also allows for other vaccines to be introduced to an already busy schedule. But there is less data and less evidence for it, and it's often been based on established herd immunity in a country that has already had a long-standing program. So now it's up to you, maybe. So which schedule would you pick? And if the questions come up, they're going to go through and ask you in turn to pick a role. Hey. So the first one is thinking about if you were a parent. So if you're a parent of a vulnerable infant, which schedule do you want them to have? So a lot of 3+1. Some depends on where you are. Some the 2+1.
So it seems we have a winner for
Cool.
parent.
Next question, please. Or just thank you. There we go. Back to being a pediatrician. So this should be easy for most people in this room. Again, you're doing well. Okay, so 2+1 winner for the pediatricians in the room. 1 less vaccine. Nice. Next question. And now if you're Gavi, so now you're responsible for paying for all these vaccines. Yeah, that seems fair. And then the last one is if you are writing the WHO paper, so you're writing the updated WHO paper, and what are you recommending? Okay, so strong for 2+1 for WHO. We'll let them know. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Liz and Lauren. After those absolutely stimulating discussions, it's my pleasure to invite our expert for this session, Professor Shamez Ladhani, who will give us insights on optimizing vaccination schedules.
Can I tell you all, the speakers that you heard right now are not experts in the field. English is often their not first language either. I think you've done an incredible job with the data that you've presented. And the reason I'm doing the second talk is I'm actually just going to regurgitate what they said because they did such a wonderful job with it. But one of the interesting things that we're talking about is this whole idea about how vaccines are licensed and who is making the decisions about what doses to give to whom and when and who does it benefit the most. And you have to remember, whether we like it or not, a lot of these vaccines are designed for the American market where cost is not always an issue. And so what it is a focus on the best individual protection that you can provide, irrespective of the number of doses, how much the vaccines cost, or how often you have to give it. Most other countries outside America are grateful to America because we then get the vaccines at subsidized costs because they pay for it there. But we try to be more sensible about the schedules that we use and how we use our programs to get the best bang for the buck. And it's really this idea that you really want the vaccines to work for you rather than you working with the vaccines you're given. Because you want to try and especially in a public health program like a UK where the vaccine is bought nationally and then offered freely to everybody, you want to make sure that you can protect as many people as you can, as quickly as you can, at the right time and at a cost-efficient way. So you can use the money that you save to other interventions that may be more beneficial in terms of health. So I'm going to talk to you about pneumococcal conjugate vaccines, meningococcal conjugate vaccines, and other examples where the UK has done that. So starting with the pneumococcal conjugate vaccines, you have heard about the different schedules that are available. And this is just to remind you that there are more than 100 different serotypes, which are based on the unique sugar capsule on the outside, which is the main virulence factor, but which they can swap around and they can change, and some become more important, and then you get population immunity, and other comes around. It is very unpredictable to know which serotypes will circulate where and when and in different parts of the world. So the UK schedule actually started with the polysaccharide vaccine, which we no longer use because it's been replaced with the conjugate vaccine. But what you will see over here is this bit where the licensed PCV13 was licensed in 2000 as a 3+1 schedule. But the UK couldn't afford a 3+1 schedule. It was very, very expensive. And it took us 6 years to do randomized control trials to see if there are other alternative schedules that we can use. And it was not until 2006 that we implemented a vaccine at a 2+1 schedule, because we showed that if you give PCV7 at 2 months, 4 months, and 12 months, it was exactly the same as giving it at 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, and 12 months. So taking out one dose made the vaccine program 25% cheaper. So it's these types of decisions that, take time to get there, but are done in a cost-efficient way, even if we have to wait, which isn't always ideal. But we implemented the vaccine in 2006, and you saw the graphs. And I'm going to show you a few of these, but they're pretty much very similar, where you see this large reduction in vaccine-type disease. This is in children under 2 years of age. And then you get some replacement in other serotypes that are not in the vaccine. And it's very unpredictable what the serotypes will be. You just hope it's nothing big or nothing more severe. But the overall reduction was huge. So we got a big benefit from the immunization program when we started. And if you look at all the age groups, you don't only see it in 2-year-olds, you see it in every age group. So even in 65-plus-year-olds, you see this big reduction in vaccine-type disease, but you have more of an increase in non-vaccine-type disease. So the overall reduction is not great, but there's a lot more adults than children. So 80% of the reduction in vaccine-type disease is in the adults, even though we're only vaccinating children. And this is what we call herd protection or herd immunity. And that's where all the money lies. That's where you are saving healthcare costs and disease and complications. In 2010, we just replaced PCV13 with PCV7, and we saw the same graphs again. We saw the reductions in the additional serotypes, and we got some increase in non-vaccine serotypes, but we were still in a really nice net benefit. So we were happy until around 2015, when suddenly we saw big increase in non-vaccine serotypes that were unpredictable. And what those increases in serotypes did is they basically balanced out all the benefit that we got from PCV13. So there was no net reduction in pneumococcal disease in the last bit. So from 2015 to 2018, we had a very stable, very low vaccine type disease. Almost all our disease were non-vaccine type disease, and the total incidence was stable. It was like we didn't have PCV13 anymore because we were seeing no further reductions. So then the question is, if you have a stable incidence, do you need to have a 2+1 schedule, given that your whole immunity in the population is based on herd immunity or indirect protection? And which is why we did a whole bunch of studies, including another randomized control trial comparing 2+1 with 1+1. And what we showed is that after one dose, you get less immune response compared to 2 doses in babies. But once you give them the booster at 1 year, it's very comparable. A few serotypes were high, a few serotypes were low, but the balance was right. And the logic was that if you can maintain herd immunity with the 1+1, then the babies will also be protected by the same herd immunity as the old people. So you don't need the only reason you give babies the dose is you get some direct protection, but it's only to prime that booster dose that gives you herd immunity. And that's why it was really important that you can only do this in countries that have a very good uptake of vaccines, especially the toddler dose, which becomes critical. We implemented the vaccine on the 1st of January 2020, and we had COVID. So we were unable to do anything for the next 2 years because COVID was literally resulted in 75% reduction in disease because of the social distancing and nothing to do with the vaccine. But by 2023, we were coming to bits that were very similar to the pre-pandemic period. So we had to use innovative methods of analysis to compare the 1+1 schedule with 3 historical birth cohorts before the pandemic to see whether the 1+1 was behaving any differently to the 2+1 during that period that I showed you that was stable. And you've seen these graphs, and I don't want to tell you too much about it, but if you look at them, there's really nothing there that strikes out at you to tell you that you should be worried about an increase after the pandemic. And God's way of creating a natural line is the COVID pandemic, which is 2020-21, which is the smallest peak. So everything before was 2+1 and everything after was 1+1. And if you look at under 4 months, who were only protected by herd immunity, you saw nothing that was worrying. The 7 to 12 months old were only protected by 1 dose of vaccine, and again, you saw nothing that would worry you. The 13 to 23 months were protected by the 1+1 schedule rather than the 2+1 after the 2021. And you can see that there really is very little difference because the vaccine type disease is just that little light blue bit at the top of the bars. And there wasn't any big increases to worry about. Even the older adults were behaving, they would be the first ones that would see trouble if you lost herd immunity. And even then, we didn't see anything. And if you look at the PCV13 serotype specifically, there really wasn't much that you worried about. There wasn't any one serotype that was creating problems. And if you live in the world of pneumococcal disease and vaccines, the 3 serotypes everybody talks about is serotype 3, 19A, and 19F. And these serotypes are present in PCV13, but PCV13 is not really good at getting rid of those serotypes. Serotype 3 specifically has very little protection from the vaccine. 19A and 19F, you see big reductions, but they don't go away. You still find it in carriage. You still find it in disease. So if ever you have a vaccine-type disease in a fully vaccinated child, you can bet 95% it's going to be one of those 3 serotypes. Even in the older adults, when you look at the specified, the serotype specifically, you'll see it's predominated by serotype 3, which just does its own thing. It doesn't get prevented by vaccine in carriage or disease. It goes up and then goes down and then goes up and goes down, irrespective of the vaccine program or the vaccine schedule. So we looked at disease incidence. So we did another paper looking specifically at children. Being a pediatrician, that was my main interest. And what we saw is that actually the disease incidence didn't really change much between the 2 schedules. The serotype disease, so PCV13 type or non-PCV13 type disease, didn't change very much. Clinical presentation with meningitis, which is what we all worry about, that didn't change either. Even when you looked at the serotypes causing meningitis, there really wasn't a shift that would tell you we should be worried about the 1+1 schedule. And I think this is the most comfortable graph that I can present because you're looking at 3 good years before the pandemic and 3 good years after the pandemic, and you could not tell when we moved from a 2+1 to a 1+1. That is the best evidence to me that really we can now run a program with a 1+1 schedule instead of the 2+1 that was licensed, or even a 3+1, and you still have no effect on population epidemiology. So in the year, the latest data we have is 24-25. In under 1s, you can see disease rates have been stable after the pandemic. In 1 to 4-year-olds, we saw this overshoot that we were worried about, thinking what's going on, but that has stabilized as well. And you can do that for all the age groups and even the overall. We're in a good place at the moment. So at least 5 years after introducing PCV13, I can tell you it looks very similar for 6 years. We really don't see an effect of 1+1 compared to a 2+1. And if you look at case numbers, they remain very low. That little overshoot in toddlers is settling. in adults and older adults too, the disease is just maintaining. In fact, we haven't even reached pandemic levels in the adults. So our disease rates are lower than the pre-pandemic years. And the 24-25 data look very similar as I've shown you, and I'll speed up through time. But this is in infants under 4 months of age. You can tell that the number of cases after the pandemic have not changed much. The 7 to 12 months is also very similar. The 1-year-olds, the 2 to 5-year-olds are all stable. This increase that we'd seen in 2-year-olds initially is now actually stabilizing, mostly because of a reduction in serotype 3 disease, which is naturally. The only unusual thing that we're seeing right now is this resurgence in serotype 4 disease. Now, serotype 4 was in PCV7 and in PCV13, and when we implemented, cases went completely down and we had really good control of it. But since the pandemic, a few countries, at least half a dozen now, are seeing outbreaks of serotype 4 disease in adults only. We don't see any cases in kids, but we're seeing these big surges in cases in adults. So Belgium, Quebec, UK, and a couple of other countries have all seen the same thing, and it seems to be circulating among homeless people and intravenous drug use populations, and we don't understand why it's still within that network when we generally control disease with childhood vaccines, but we can't control this particular serotype. So there's a lot of work going on right now. We're starting to vaccinate our homeless people just because of this increase. But it is interesting how these serotypes emerge when you least expect it. So for the second half, I'm going to tell you about meningococcal disease. That was the other presentation that was done. As you now know, there are 6 serogroups based on the sugar capsule that cause almost all the invasive disease in the world. That's A, B, C, W, X, Y. The vaccines of ACWY were polysaccharide vaccines have been available for 50 years now. But really, the game changer was the MenC conjugate vaccines, because these conjugate vaccines are very good at removing disease and eliminating carriage so that you get herd immunity as well. And we've had the experience of MenC disease for many years, so we've played around with it a lot, and we've learned a lot from it. So when we first implemented it in 1999, we knew that this vaccine produced really good immune memory. So we said, just vaccinate the babies. When they see the strain again, the immune memory will kick in and they'll be protected. You don't have to give a booster. And that was in 1999. But very soon after that, we learned quickly that if you don't have antibodies for these fast-acting disease in your blood, immune memory takes 3 to 5 days to kick in. It's too late. And therefore, you need to maintain a certain amount of antibodies in the body, and then the immune memory can kick in. So what we started seeing was increases in cases, mostly of Hib disease, which was also 3+0 at the time, and we had to implement a booster. Now, there weren't many cases in children at the time, so you couldn't justify adding an extra dose. So what we did is we took out 1 dose from the 3+0, and we put it into a 2+1. So you give 2 infant doses and a booster. And these were done based on clinical trials that showed that you do get the benefit in immunogenicity. They weren't made up. And then after a few years, we realized that it's the teenagers who are the main carriers. So you have to protect against carriage in teenagers, not in children. And if you do a good job with protecting the teenagers against carriage, the children will be protected from herd immunity. So in 2010-11, we shifted to 1 infant dose with a 1 toddler dose, and we shifted 1 dose to adolescents in a cost-neutral way, without any extra costs. And it is this adolescent dose that was designed to protect against herd immunity, prevent carriage, and protect everybody else. And then in 2015-16, we would have removed the children's dose, but the toddler dose was a Hib MenC vaccine, and we needed a Hib conjugate as a booster. So that stayed in, and we gave the adolescent dose, became an ACWY, And then recently in 24-25, we've removed MenC from our infant program. So all our ACWY disease protection happens because of that one dose of disease in one dose of MenACWY conjugate in adolescents. And the reason we did that was because from 2010, we started seeing this big increase in disease in all age groups because of a very virulent strain that had the engine of MenC, but then had taken this capsule of MenW. So it was acting like a MenW, but it had very high invasiveness and case fatality rates. So by 2014-15, we had about 176 cases in all age groups. But you can't vaccinate a population of 55 million to try and prevent 176 cases. The economics don't work. So what we decided to do, and this is where you're optimizing your immunization schedule to get what you want, we basically vaccinated the group that carries the bug. So the theory was if you vaccinate them before they start carrying it, between 15 and 18, they will stop carrying the meningococci and they will stop transmitting it to others, and disease rates will come down across all age groups because of herd immunity. So the direct protection in teenagers was not that important, even though there were a few cases. It was the teenagers being used to provide herd immunity across the population. And we saw that really nicely because W cases first fell after a year really nicely. And then we also saw reductions in MenY disease, and the MenC disease perhaps might have been going up, but we controlled that as well with a single dose of MenC vaccine in adolescents. So the big question is Bexsero, and I think everybody's heard a lot about MenB vaccines in this conference. The problem, as you heard, is that the sugar capsule of MenB is very similar to human nerve cells. So if you force the body to make antibodies against MenB capsule, you could induce antibodies that will attack your own nerve cells and create autoimmunity. It's a theoretical problem, but it is one that was worrying the company, so they never went down that route. So they developed a protein-based vaccines. I'm going to tell you about Bexsero. You heard about the other one, which is Trumemba, which is a very similar vaccine, but currently it's not being used in any country. This vaccine, it's really important for you clinicians to realize, was not designed to cover every single strain of MenB, because it only protects those strains that have the antigen on the surface. So you can't know whether the strain infecting the child has got these antigens unless your reference laboratory tells you, and therefore it's not a vaccine failure. And that means that there's nothing wrong with the child, yeah? Unlike conjugate vaccines where you do worry if you get a vaccine failure that perhaps the child's immune system isn't great, Bexsero will protect against 75% of strains, but not all strains. And at the time, Bexsero was licensed as a 3+1 schedule in infants, in children again. And we looked at the data that were available, and we found a study where we saw that 2 doses in infants protected almost every infant against at least one antigen. And based on that, we said, look, we can't afford a 3+1. Perhaps we can afford a 2+1 because there's sufficient data to show that it should work. And we wanted to vaccinate infants very early because you can see this rapid rise in disease cases by 5 months and then falling down. And so we brought in a program that specifically targeted the age group with the highest disease burden, and that's infants and toddlers. You can see the number of cases in adolescents is very, very small compared to this. So it would be silly to use a vaccine that has never been used in a population and use it widely until you know it works. And at the time, we wanted to make sure we got the most bang for our buck, so we only focused on the infant immunization program, which we implemented in 2015 at 8 weeks, so 2 months, 4 months, and 1 year. And what we showed is that within 3 years of the program, we got 75% reduction in disease only in the age group that got vaccinated. And the other age groups, we saw no benefit at all. And this was the first real-world evidence that the vaccine actually protected children, because until then, this vaccine was based on laboratory studies only. So this was a really important proof of concept for countries to have confidence that this vaccine is doing what it's supposed to. And our preliminary data show that the protection will last for at least 6 years and may last even longer. We also show that because these proteins can be found on any meningococci, it can also help protect against other serogroups such as serogroup W. And again, we only saw reductions in children who were eligible for Bexsero and not in the other age groups. So one of the things that came out of this is when you look at disease incidence in the first year of life, this orange, brown, gray for you, the shaded area, that was the distribution of cases in the first year of life. And you can see the peak is somewhere between 5 and 6 months of age. When we brought the vaccine in at 2 months and 4 months, the peak age came down to 3 months and then it started going down. And our program was 2, 4, 12. So the logical question is, what if we give it at 2, 3, 12? We get 1 month earlier protection without compromising on cost, and perhaps we can reduce more cases because they're vaccinated earlier and you have more opportunities to vaccinate them because they're younger. And it was because of this that we actually did a randomized control trial recently where we swapped the MenB with PCV13 at 2 months and 3 months. So you get MenB, and PCV to see whether we can give earlier protection for MenB without compromising PCV13. Because you have to remember, this PCV13 is only a priming dose. It's not designed to protect. It's there to prime your booster. So whether you give it at 3 months or 4 months shouldn't make a difference. And actually what we found is that there was no difference in immunogenicity if you give it at 2 months, 3 months, and 12 months. 2 months, 3 months, and 12 months, and giving PCV for 13 at 4 months and 12 months, you got better responses because the kids were older. And the good thing about the UK is we presented the data to the JCVI, and within 12 months of the data becoming available, the vaccine program changed. So nationally now, our program now has the vaccine at MenB at 2 months, 3 months, and 12 months, and PCV13 at 4 months and 12 months. And the ability to be able to do that in real time means you're benefiting from the data that are being generated in real time to protect those, especially if they are at cost neutral. So just to let you know, we had the MenC program that started in the 1990s, and you see that got rid of the orange bars. You can see that in 2015, we brought the ACWY vaccine, which got rid of MenW, which is the gray bar. The pandemic was associated with very low disease activity, but what we have now, more than 80% of our cases are MenB disease. And you've heard about MenB cases, you've heard about the adolescents, you've heard about the outbreaks. I don't need to tell you any more than that. Remember that our kids are only protected till 10 years of age. They'll be 11 this year, and then they're not protected at all. And we're having cases that are extremely severe in adolescents. So every few weeks, there are cases that are reported in the newspaper telling us, you know, there's a very sick child or death occurring, and most of them are in adolescents and young adults. You've heard about the outbreaks. We had 3 big outbreaks. There was one in Kent, there was one in Dorset, and there was one near Oxford. It resulted in massive campaigns of antibiotics and vaccines, and there are really strong ongoing discussions now as to how we should implement an adolescent MenB program, because that is important. So despite the small number of cases, we need to find a way to try and get this vaccine into the program to try and protect the young adults. So just to finish off, I'm not going to talk to you about the pertussis program. We implemented a pregnancy program to protect the babies at the time when pregnancy was a big taboo for vaccines, but we've seen great successes with our maternal pertussis program. COVID was a whirlwind, but we were constantly updating our data and evaluating the vaccines to make real-time recommendations. We implemented the COVID vaccines for teenagers within 3 months of the vaccine becoming licensed, when it hadn't even been tested in children, because we saw some high-risk groups dying very quickly from disease, especially those with neurodisability and Down syndrome. So we vaccinated them even before licensure. The Mpox vaccine, when that came in, we were vaccinating our children who were exposed despite no studies in children, but again, using first principles to make recommendations to protect the children rather than waiting for the data to become available. So just to conclude, if you're going to counter licensure, then it needs to be driven by economic considerations, so giving fewer doses to save money, or it's emergency responses, such as our MenC program and ACWY program. If you recommend a cost-neutral program, it's more likely to be accepted because nobody really cares what you do as long as you're not spending the government's money. And we've done that with MenC, we've done that with MenB, and more recently with PCV. But what you do need to do is when you do go against licensure, you do need the science to support that. You need the evidence that the benefits outweigh the risks. You need an expert scientific committee that is able to evaluate data and have the confidence to make recommendations for a national panel. And this is only possible because you have a national surveillance program. So the moment you have any trouble, you can take actions to reverse your decisions. And with that, I thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Professor Ladhani. That was amazing. We'd like to invite questions from the audience. We already have a couple of questions on the app. The first question is from Stephanie Desmet. What is your opinion regarding PCV 22+1 versus PCV 23+1 in a country with high vaccine uptake, low PCV 13 IPD and carriage rates in young children? What is your opinion about
So PCV 22+1 in a country with high vaccine uptake and low PCV 13 IPD and carriage rates? I haven't seen any evidence that 3+1 is better than 2+1 in any program. Theoretically, 3+1 might give you personal benefit, protection between the third dose and your booster, but that is very theoretical. And if you have a good program, there won't even be serotypes circulating to actually add to that risk. So the problem is not 3+1 versus 2+1. I don't think most countries, when a country makes a recommendation, most countries would not be concerned about using a 2+1 compared to a 3+1 if they understand the vaccine. The problem happens is that for Europe, the vaccine was only given a 3+1 licensure, which is an issue for individual practitioners because going against licensure is then putting risk on yourself. But with the same data, the countries that are making recommendations are very happy to use a 2+1 with the same vaccine because they know that 2+1 gives you very good direct protection and within a year or two will give you excellent indirect protection.
And the next question is...
Yeah,
all right, so we'll take one from there. Yeah, sure.
Thank you. I'm Panagiotta Diamantopoulou from Greece. I would like to ask that in our country we have in the general population the 2+1 schedule, but in the premature infants the 3+1. So I would like to ask if there is sufficient data for the premature infants that it would benefit for the 2+1.
It's exactly the same problem as it. If you believe that the herd immunity is doing its job, then the premature babies should be protected the same way as 90-year-olds in care homes. So there are two trends. There are people and institutions that believe only direct protection is the way to do it, and in those institutions, in some countries, including, they recommend a 3+1 schedule for their risk patients, including premature babies. But if you do believe in the philosophy of herd immunity, then a 2+1, a good 2+1 program in your country will protect them just as well. So I don't have any qualms about 2+1 and 3+1, even though the antibodies are lower with a 3+1, with PCV20, nobody's shown that gives you less protection. Yeah? There's some serotypes it works very well in, some serotypes it don't work very well in. But the UK does not recommend a separate program for premature infants. And we do feel very strongly about herd immunity being your prime target, which is what we achieve.
Thank you.
Hello, sir. My name is Irina. I'm from Brazil. I'm an infectious disease pediatrician specialist. I have a question about not how many vaccinations we should give, how many dosages, but about the time gap between them. I had a child that was vaccinated at 3 months with the for MenC and for MenB, the first dosage of each, and inadvertently she was vaccinated again with the same dosage for MenC and for MenB at the 4 months. In Brazil, we have different schedule regarding private sector and healthcare system. But the question was she needed to be vaccinated again at 5 months with the both dosages? Because since your class was amazing class, maybe it wasn't needed, but the private sector where she did, the clinic where she did, asked for revaccination. So that's my question. Was it needed?
So I think that for the MenC vaccine, which is a conjugate vaccine, we know a lot about the vaccine. And if you give a 1 month gap, you get sufficient boosting from the second dose. If you leave 2 months, it's more, but you don't necessarily need more. So a month would have been fine. We ran a whole national program with 2, 3, and 12 months, and it worked really well. So that wouldn't be an issue. With the MenB vaccine, it's a protein vaccine. So we were the data for the 2+1 actually came from a study that did it 2-4-6, but they had data for 2-4. So we kept it at 2-4. We didn't have the confidence to reduce that interval and take out a dose. But given that we've done this recent study, which shows that 2-3-12 is the same as 2-4-12, we've changed all our wording. So 1 month between the two doses is perfectly acceptable. So you wouldn't need to.
For them both, right?
But if that child got 3 doses, it will give them even more protection, even if they don't need it. So there's no harm in it. It probably wasn't needed.
Okay, thank you so much.
Good afternoon. Thank you for 3 excellent presentations. My name's Tom Nutt. I'm Chief Executive of the charity Meningitis Now, based in the UK. And my question is about policy making. And I was fascinated by the poll that one of the earlier pairs of presenters showed us, which demonstrated that even within this room, depending on the perspective you adopt, you might arrive at a different suggested vaccine schedule. And I think this is fascinating because, of course, we, in the UK's case, through the JCVI, have to make decisions about whether or not to introduce vaccines. So given that this simple straw poll this afternoon showed that depending on what perspective you adopt, you arrive at a different answer, how do we make sure that when decisions are made at a national level, you're adopting the right perspective in order to get the right answer?
Okay, so I am in the minority camp where I don't believe in harmonization of immunization schedules. I think every region or country should be able to make their own decisions based on their epidemiology and their risk. Yeah, vaccinating half of America against MenB disease when it's extremely rare, just because there's a vaccine available, wouldn't make financial sense in any other country. But there are other countries where, an adolescent program might make sense, but if you don't get enough uptake and you're not going to get herd immunity, it might not be the right way. So I don't think that we need to make sense. What we need to do is we need to be armed with understanding these vaccines to be able to make the best decision. And it's not that easy because especially when things like the PCV20 happen where, one country says 2+1 is completely fine and then EMA goes and says, well, 3+1 is what we're recommending. And when Europe relies on licensure for individual vaccine recommendation, you're taking it on yourself to go against licensure. And that makes it very, very difficult and you have to then wait for countries that have adopted the 2+1 to get the data to get the licensure change, which is 5 years, 10 years. So I just think that we need people in senior levels to understand vaccines and epidemiology to make a decision for their people better. So, and that's where NITACs come in very importantly. But I think that's the way to go. This idea that everybody should have the same schedule is not right.
We have a few questions on the app. Do you have data when you would switch to PCV 15 or PCV 20? In Switzerland, we vaccinate predominantly PCV 15 in 2+1, but PCV 20 is only recommended in 3+1 because it did not pass the non-inferiority.
Yeah, so that's one of the big problems in many countries is, you know, everybody wants to use PCV 20, but then they can't justify the 3+1, so they end up using a less covered vaccine just because they can give it as 2+1, and it's better than PCV 13, so why not use that? With the UK, the recommendations were that either PCV 13 or PCV 15 could be used, and there was a national tender, and PCV 13 won the tender. Even though 15 has 2 more serotypes, 13 was cheaper, so we continue to use PCV 13. A lot of work is going on PCV 20. Now, we have our own big problems because, in a way, by going down to a 1+1 schedule, now we don't know whether we should be bringing the PCV 20 as a 2+1 or a 1+1 with a catch-up program, or then just bring in a 1+1 and see what happens. So there are studies taking place to see how best to implement a 1+1 or a 2+1 PCV 20, but we're not rushing with it. So we're losing out on the extra 7 serotypes until the new data become available. But that's the choice that we made when we went to a 1+1.
Ron Dagan from Israel. I would like to make 2 points about the 2+1 or 3+1. The EMA has approved for PCV 20 3+1, while for PCV 15 2+1, they were based on some non-inferiority issues. The EMA did not say that it's forbidden to give 2+1. The EMA left there a sentence that it can be decided differently by the authorities of a country given the epidemiology. There are 2 countries in Europe, Portugal and Greece, that adopted the 2+1. They are not criminals. They did not do something illegal. They took responsibility exactly for the same points that the young people brought in the discussion, that you have to make some decision based on what's best for you. Greece has a fantastic document of about 2 pages explaining very nicely why they did it. So it's not, they cannot be accused of doing it like because they wanted. And I think Ellen is from Greece. So I think you should take care that people here get the document. It's an amazing, short and concise and very good document. Just to 2 points, other points. The 2+1 or 3+1 for PCV 20. You, rightly so, preached the booster point. The booster after 2+1 or 3+1 PCV 20 is exactly the same. And therefore, if you believe in the booster, you believe you don't need a 3rd dose because it's exactly the same. For the preemies, we still have circulating disease even with the best vaccine program. And so there are 19Fs and a little bit of 19As and whatever. Some people, including myself, think that preemies and compromised people are at increased risk for every encounter. Yeah. So we do give them a 3rd dose because 3 doses are giving better individual protection just because they have suffered enough and they will suffer more if they come to it, not because we think it will change. So this is just a little bit different points.
Which is why I completely think we shouldn't harmonize our schedules. Everybody uses science to describe what they want to do, and everything you've said is completely correct. But when an authority makes that decision and supports and says, we are recommending a 2+1, it makes it much easier. When you don't have that support from the top at an individual level, and most pediatricians who vaccinate in clinics do not have the time, knowledge, understanding, experience, all that for every single vaccines out there. What you want is a few intellectual boffins sitting in the room making the decision so you can look after your kids because you've got other problems. So, having strong NITAGs is really critical to have a good immunization program in your countries. And if you have opportunities to support them, you should, because often pediatricians don't get involved in public health and policy. And it's really important that you advocate for the children.
Yeah, so thank you, Professor Dagan. It was a really nice comment about the implementation that we did in Greece. And what I would like to say, and also ask your opinion as well, is sometimes for the studies to get the license of the vaccine, they only based on antibody levels. But this does not always correlate with the incidence of the disease, right? What's going to be the real impact in the real life?
Yeah.
And I think when the PCV13 was licensed, one of the serotypes, I think serotype 6, did not meet the inferiority criteria, right? But after the implementation of the 13, we don't see a higher incidence of serotype 6. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I think they don't always correlate. And sometimes we look at the total antibody levels, but we don't know the neutralizing antibodies, which I think in the studies, in all the serotypes, they reach non-inferiority, right?
So I always say, if you need this much antibody to protect and you make this much, you'll be protected. If the next vaccine gives you this much, you're still protected. But we are comparing it in a different way. But a lot of these vaccines you only learn by implementing. So we get there, it just is unnecessary waste of time. So when the 2+1 works for PCV20, they will get the licensure and we won't even discuss it. But it takes time.
Hi, it's Justin Penner from the UK. I'm going to put my hat on as a Canadian PID doctor, and for the sake of controversy, in terms of where I don't disagree with you that individual level decisions in terms of vaccines are important on a national scale, and I probably can speak for Canadians who are in this room, on a national level, differences in vaccine schedules based on state or province is an absolute nightmare. And I think that it leads to children falling through the cracks, so it's not such an easy decision.
No, I mean, that's just like traveling within Europe will be the same thing, because when you move states and all that, and it does, you do need a robust healthcare system to identify and correct that. But what I will tell you is, whatever schedule they are using, if they have caught up to that schedule, almost certainly it will have done the job. It's not very often that you have schedules that are less protective. They're just different. And so I get your point. I get the point of trying to catch them up, but they're not the kids you should be worried about. It's the ones who are under-vaccinated or unvaccinated that are the problems.
I mean, not only is procurement a huge issue in a national program like in Canada, but when kids move or they live in a border city or a border town, it's exceptionally difficult, and then kids just don't get their vaccines is the problem.
Thank you. Just one last question from the app that I think is interesting for the meningococcal B vaccination. So, from my understanding, we started the vaccination 10 years ago. So now our infants are protected, let's say, for 10 years, right? Or the studies say at least 5 years of protection. And our adolescents at the moment are not protected. That's why probably we see these outbreaks. But are we sure that the vaccination in infancy, the infants that we now vaccinate, will be protected when they become adolescents?
I don't think anybody would expect that at all. The question is, are they primed for a booster? So the big question in the meningococcal world is, can you boost them with a single Bexsero, or do you need to give them 2 doses of Bexsero to get the same effect? And there's a lot of work going on. If it does prime, then 1 dose makes it very attractive, especially if you have a pentavalent, then you have A, B, C, W, Y, and then you can give 1 dose in adolescents and they're protected against everything. So that's very, very attractive. Data are coming through that there is priming and 1 dose may be enough. 2 doses becomes very expensive. But for the UK, we have another 3 years to make that decision. So we're working hard to collect the data, because ideally we'd like to give 1 booster next to ACWY if it is affordable.
I think we can close now. So thank you. It was an amazing session. Lots of information, great talks. Thanks for staying until the end. And one important thing, tomorrow we have another Young ESPID debate, as much nice as today, so please don't miss.